a perfect, almost achingly beautiful late summer morning in early September 2001. A day of seemingly infinite visibility, one man later said, characterized by the rare and exquisite flying conditions airline pilots call severe clear. Life in New York and much of the rest of the contemporary world was changed irrevocably in the space of less than 2 hours.
In my years in New York, there's obviously nothing like it. Nothing comes close. As a newspaper man, I've seen other horrors, wars, and the earthquake in Mexico in '85, which killed 20,000 people. But that was an act of nature, not of man. The combination of the death, the spectacular event of the 2 skyscrapers collapsing, and the motivations behind it, all those things, I think, made this something that just struck a knife right into the heart of every New Yorker, knowing that we'd never be able to look at our city the same way again.
First of all, it's a surprise on a beautiful day at the center of this powerful nation, which has not been attacked on its own shores or its own land by a foreign power in almost 200 years. So that's a new thing. Secondly, the public focus on this. Never in the history of the world had there been anything even close. There's not really a second place. The second place would probably be the assassination of President Kennedy. You know, a world event where the world is focused on that story, but nothing like this, where it's seen instantaneously as it happens by tens of millions of people around the globe.
In a little less than 2 hours, with an almost poetically horrifying symmetry, the symbols and instruments of the city's uniquely air-minded culture, and of globalization itself, skyscrapers, jets, and the mass media, would be turned back against themselves with a devastatingly lethal impact and effect.
We were utterly struck by the fact that nothing here fit with any prior experience. I mean, of course, people were talking about how it looked like something in a disaster movie. We could only think in terms of life imitating art because we had no other thing to compare it to. So people went to the movies and compared it.
Around 8:45 a.m. on the morning of September 11th, 2001, people along the west side of Manhattan heard the piercing whine of a jet plane moving south down the Hudson. Everything about its trajectory was wrong. Heading south along an airway normally reserved for northbound traffic, it was moving much too fast and much too close to the ground, nearly 500 miles per hour at an altitude of just 900 feet, more than twice the speed permitted for aircraft that low. It took less than 90 seconds for American Airlines Flight 11 to hurtle the entire length of Manhattan Island. A little after 8:46 a.m., the huge 137-ton Boeing 767, measuring more than half a football field in length from wingtip to wingtip, and carrying more than 9,000 gallons of highly inflammable jet fuel, flashed across the final 20 blocks from Canal Street to the World Trade Center, and tore through the north wall of the North Tower between the 94th and 98th floors. Instantly killing everyone on board and wreaking incomprehensible carnage across 5 full floors of the building. Witnesses on the upper floors of the South Tower were stunned to see a wall of flame burst through the south windows of Tower 1, 130 feet away, followed by a shower of disintegrating desks, files, furniture, computer terminals, airplane parts, and burning bodies.
If you were just below where the plane hit, your ceilings fell, you saw the glint of the plane going overhead, there's an overwhelming feeling of terror, and you were probably knocked off your feet. And of course, if you were in the zone itself, you may have died instantly, but even very close, and this is very tragic, very close to the regions of impact, there were people who lived for long minutes as they sought refuge from the building flames, the tremendous heat. A couple of them even were able to phone. And then often in that region, their lives ended quickly in the fire or they chose to leap from the tower.
That airplane straddled several floors, and it delivered a hell of a punch. The building swayed. We know that when that punch was delivered, the swaying took the form of waves that ran vertically up and down the building multiple times, sort of echoing up and down the building. And really the incredible thing is, considering the speed with which those airplanes were flying, enormous weight, enormous speed. Rather than decapitating the buildings or pushing them over, the buildings absorbed the impact entirely. They took the hit and they stood.
I was heading for the Holland Tunnel, which has a 4-block concourse, if you want to call it, leading to the toll booth. And as I turned into the first of those 4 blocks and I looked up, I said, oh my God, there was a hole in tower number 1. And my first thought was, it can't be a helicopter, the hole's too big. And the second was, my God, it can't be a commercial plane because they're instructed to fly into the river if they have problems. I knew that.
By 8:55, an army of firemen, police officers, emergency medical personnel, and government officials, including the mayor himself, had begun to descend on Lower Manhattan, along with an army of reporters, photographers, and television crews, as the machinery of the largest media apparatus in the world began to focus on the 16-acre site. At 9:02 a.m., little more than 15 minutes after the attack, millions of people in the metropolitan region, and tens of millions more across the country and around the world, were staring intently at the smoldering skyline of Lower Manhattan, when a dark shape appeared on the horizon above the New Jersey lowlands and came hurtling across the upper bay.
I got out of my car, other people did, and suddenly I saw plane number 2 coming from the south over the Statue of Liberty, going very fast, they say between 500 and 600 miles an hour. And I saw it smash into the south wall of number 2 in an oblique angle. I saw this big ball of flame, and the nose came out on the north side and the east side. And my first reaction, my God, there's poor people above, because they're going to wipe out all the staircases and all the sprinkler systems. That airplane just went sliced right through it. And the power of such a big plane at that speed. And for a moment, incredible sadness for the people there, and then an incredible anger, feeling that somebody had deliberately rammed into those towers and those poor innocent people that were in there.
I was at the Tweed Courthouse on Chambers Street, right behind City Hall. I grabbed a notebook and ran to the street in time to see the second one hit. I knew right away, obviously, it was terrorism, this amazing fireball that came roaring towards Broadway. And people on the street corner just going, oh, shit, oh, shit, oh, shit. That expression must have been uttered like 10 million times that day. Just astonishment at what they were looking at.
We know that when the airplanes hit, there was an instantaneous release of energy in the form of fuel vaporized that caught on fire. There was fire instantaneously across multiple floors. That fire, which was a kerosene fire, jet fuel fire, burned very hot, but it also burned very fast. We're talking 3 to 5 minutes. But what it did is it ignited a simultaneous office fire, in both cases, across multiple floors. An office fire the like of which had not been imagined before. In all cases, an office fire is many things burning, partitions, carpets in particular, computer cases, but paper, mostly paper. And if you look at the dynamics of the collapse, what you find is that in both cases, it was the paper fire that was sustained long enough because of the amount of paper in there to cause the steel to weaken, to cause the collapse and the hammering down in both cases. I mean, paper on that day was a constant presence. It rained down on the city as if in mockery of the kind of business that was done at the Trade Center. Here, have some of the paper. and it burned, and it brought the buildings down.
The second plane had struck the South Tower at 9:02:54 a.m., just 16 minutes after the first plane went in. By then, the first teams of firemen and rescue workers had already arrived at the foot of the North Tower, where they were greeted by a scene of horror and devastation that defied the imagination. On the Austin Tobin Plaza, there were corpses everywhere. The mangled bodies of men and women who had already jumped or fallen from the upper floors of the building, and the charred remains of passengers from Flight 11, some still belted into their seats. Far above, meanwhile, in the upper reaches of the towers themselves, the gaping black holes where the planes had gone in marked a stark dividing line between life and death.
In the North Tower, the plane struck at the center, and it also struck much higher up. And because it struck at the center, the fuel immediately went down the shafts and created a much broader fire. The flames were much more intense. The number of floors that were available to move up and down were many fewer. So what happened was people were breaking windows in the North Tower, desperate to get air. And there was no place to go because there were no stairwells that were open up and down. People were stacked 4 or 5 on top of each other at the broken windows, desperate to breathe. And other people were hanging on to each other across the steel columns from window to window, hanging out of the windows, desperate to breathe, and just, grasping each other to keep hold of the building.
One of the most horrific scenes in the history of the nation took place 1,000 feet above Lower Manhattan. And it took the lives of people who were staring down at safety, at the most populous city in the nation, civilization at its peak. But they didn't have anywhere to get there. And there's really few words to describe how terrible that must have been.
By 9:30, ordinary life had all but ceased across the city, as millions of New Yorkers and hundreds of millions more around the world looked on in shock and disbelief at the nightmarish images unfolding in real time on TV.
You usually can gauge things, within a few minutes, so that they may start getting worse. But at one time you say, well, this is what they are. But this was something that started getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
At 9:38, word came that terrorists had commandeered a third jetliner and crashed it into the Pentagon, killing everyone on board and 126 people on the ground. And not long after, that a fourth plane had crashed into a hillside in rural Pennsylvania, brought down by some of its own heroic passengers before it could reach its intended target in the nation's capital.
What struck me at the time, I think, is the most significant part of that, was when they came on and said that the Federal Aviation Administration ordered all air traffic in the United States to be grounded. I knew that had never happened before. There are tens of thousands of planes in the United States at any one time, and to say they have to land now. What hit me was that this is really beyond whatever I had thought.
And then, on a morning of hideous surprises, already without precedent in the city's history, something happened that no one had ever thought possible before. Something beyond comprehension. Something that had never happened in the history of tall buildings since the first skyscrapers had gone up at the foot of Manhattan over a century before. High up in both towers, the raging fires were now generating 3 to 5 times the heat of a nuclear power plant, and the interior temperature had soared in places to nearly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At 9:58 a.m., having withstood the ferocious heat of the inferno within for nearly an hour, the floor trusses on the 80th floor of the South Tower began to give way. Columns along the east wall began to buckle outwards, and the entire building began to come down. As the quarter-mile-tall structure dissolved into a massive shroud of smoke and dust, thousands of people in the surrounding streets began to cry out in horror and disbelief, then ran for their lives, pursued by an enormous billowing cloud of dust and debris.
It never occurred to me that these two buildings would come down. So that when they did, it was the most shocking moment maybe that I'd ever had. That the South Tower began to tip forward and then righted itself and came down in what in memory seems like a slow motion moment. It happened in 10 seconds. 10 seconds. It's a knockout in boxing. The whole thing came down. It was just, to me, still, it's a staggering moment in New York, in any history, in world history, for a place that had never had anything like that happen to it ever before. The Empire State Building didn't come down. You couldn't. 93, the 4,000-pound bomb goes off in the basement, doesn't come down. This time it came down. This time they figured it out. And I thought, oh man, something new's happened here.
At 10:28 a.m., 30 minutes after the South Tower fell, the television antenna atop the North Tower began to give way, followed a fraction of a second later by the upper floors of the building itself, as the entire North Tower now came down too.
Then there was a release of heat that was off the scale. Fires ignited. Crushing and tearing was going on. And chaos, mostly just chaos, on some mathematical level was happening. You can't even describe it physically because it was too big, too chaotic. It was a cataclysmic release. And it released back into the city in 10 seconds in each case. The surprising thing to me has always been how concentrated it was. They came straight down as if they were aimed directly at their foundations. And of course, anything that was directly underneath no longer existed afterward. The so-called bathtub that ran 6 floors underground below street absorbed the brunt of the energy. Inside that bathtub during those twin 10-second pulses, what was really happening, nobody can even imagine. We know what the results were. The results were, we were grappling with results inside that hole for the following 9 months. We're, in a sense, probably will be grappling with the results for years to come.
I was upstate New York when I heard of the towers being destroyed. A side of me was not believing it. It was a very strange blend of feelings. One was the sorrow, the horror at witnessing human life being obliterated for no reason like that. And I felt something beyond words. I felt almost an alive part of me being squeezed to nothing, being extracted, an evisceration almost. It's an interesting question when you saw those 2 giant towers collapse almost cleanly on themselves. Where did they go? I have read in some architecture article that they were made mostly of air. If you consider the space between the solid molecules, the steel, the concrete, the glass, the aluminum, there was a lot of air. It was mostly air, actually. And they disappeared, and it's... where did they go was part of the disbelief that I was feeling, because how you can make 200,000 tons of steel disappear, it's unbelievable.
In the end, the 500,000 tons of concrete, steel, glass, and aluminum in each tower had hurtled to the ground in a virtual freefall, traveling at a speed of 125 miles an hour. Shock waves from the twin impacts were picked up more than 40 miles away by seismic instruments used for monitoring earthquakes. The immense columns of rubble and dust drifting away from ground zero could be clearly seen from outer space.
I have to tell you, I didn't know whether the buildings were empty or whether there were tens of thousands of people in them. I just had no idea, and I was totally devastated by the fact that all those people were in there, and this building that I had designed was perhaps falling on them. The buildings were not so important to me. I'm good at buildings, but people are another matter. It was a terrible event. Absolutely terrible.
I don't think you can measure the impact. It's absolutely enormous. Everybody felt it, but of course those who felt it most and will never get over the effects are those who lost people. And the sheer numbers are so appalling, and the horror of the attack is so appalling that in one sense New York will never be the same.
With the collapse of the second tower, an eerie quiet descended on New York. By 11 o'clock, hundreds of thousands of dazed and disheveled office workers, many covered in ashes and dust, could be seen marching north from the financial district, straggling uptown along the West Side Highway, or heading over the bridges to Brooklyn. Down at the site itself, hundreds of firemen and rescue workers groped their way across a surreal landscape of smoke and flames, at the edge of an immense 7-story pile of tangled steel and debris, searching desperately for any signs of life. All day, doctors and nurses in emergency rooms around the city braced for the anticipated onslaught of injured survivors that never came. Those who got out, one nurse later said. Those who didn't, died. Around 5:20 in the afternoon, building number 7, a 47-story tower on the north side of Vesey Street, succumbed to a raging oil fire within and fell to the ground.
One of the surprising things, you could call it almost a sad poetic justice, is that the only buildings that were completely destroyed by this collapse were the buildings that carried the Trade Center label, buildings 1 through 7. No other buildings, with the exception of the small Orthodox church there that dissolved, were destroyed. And every building that carried the label died.